Welcome everyone to Circular Economy in the Supply Chain. My name is Deanna Yee, and I'm here with thought leader Deborah Dahl.
Hi, Deanna.
Hi. First, I'll give an introduction of myself. I am a Solution and Strategy Support Manager for Hillebrand. We're a beer, wine, and spirit supply chain solution provider. I'm also a longtime volunteer with ASCM. I've contributed to SCORE Model version 9, 10, and 11, and currently on the board of directors for APEX Houston. Currently, and the reason why we're here today, is that ASCM has a research, strategy, and innovation committee, and the innovation group, which is a subgroup of that committee, is bringing a series of innovative topics to the community. And one of those topics is circular economy. And therefore, we've brought Deborah in here to share all of her knowledge with us in this time frame, and I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Perfect. All the knowledge on circular supply chains in this
Yes.
15-minute soundbite, which will be perfect. Thanks, Deanna. My name is Deborah Dahl. I really love supply chain. I've worked in and around different supply chains in different industries. A couple years ago, circularity really caught my eye, and so I've been delving into this space and really excited to share with you what I've learned during that time. I am currently working at GE Digital and also the co-founder and co-host of the Supply Chain Revolution podcast, and really excited to share some thoughts with you today.
Well, one of the things that the audience doesn't know, I actually read an article that you had published on the ASCM website, and I thought this is really cool stuff. Circular economy, SCORE model, how we can use it and better the world. And in this time of restarting, reevaluating our supply chains, this is the time for us to learn as individuals and with our companies and our supply chains, what can we do better as we're restarting in this environment. And so we're going to start with a brief overview of circularity versus sustainability. Deborah?
Perfect. Thanks, Tina. Believe it or not, this is one of the most frequent questions that I get is how is circular economy different from sustainability, and therefore how does that difference going to impact my supply chain, the decisions I make as a supply chain professional. And if we think about sustainability from a SCORE E perspective, and so part of an ASCM offering is around this enterprise look across three areas around ecological nature of a supply chain, the ethical nature, and the economic nature and elements. And while sustainability and circularity are closely related, the biggest difference is that sustainability really looks at all three of those that I've just mentioned, and really looking at how do we continue working in a way that allows these three areas to really shine. In circularity, the main focus is really on the ecological piece out of necessity. So saying, gosh, how do we best steward our resources and materials? And by doing so, the circular economy says those businesses will make money. Now, there's a debate, and potentially we can all debate this together, that the ethical part of supply chains don't by nature fall into the scope of a circular economy. Now, a circular supply chain is shorter because normally they're kept more regionally. You want to keep items as themselves, as close to themselves for as long as possible. And so because of that, we get shorter supply chains, and we know shorter supply chains means that there's less room to hide. So we typically do see more ethical behavior in these circular supply chains than we wouldn't. But that's one main focus. The second main focus is really the focus on the economic piece. So this idea of a circular economy is a shift to a new type of global economy. And so if you're saying, okay, here's this circular economy, circular business project, but gosh, it's really not making any money, then I'd push you to go back and look, is it a sustainability initiative which has lots of business benefits outside of the bottom line? Or is it truly a circular project and initiative? Because that can be one of the big differences.
I think that from my background working in strategy and collaboration amongst different departments in your company, I think this is where you're looking at circularity and how does it benefit the bottom line. So you make those strategic decisions and improvements to your supply chain. And that's what we need to be doing at this time as we restart. So what else does it mean to the supply chain professional?
Yeah,
Big
also a good
question.
question. It is. This could be, probably a series on its own, but
Yes.
just to get the critical thinking and the ideas going, two main areas to talk about here. One is that the transition to a circular economy is inevitable. A lot of this is happening because we, as a global economy, are running out of materials. We sometimes think, oh, we've got unlimited amounts of materials inside the earth. In reality, we don't. And the viability of being able to mine for some of these materials is really starting to run out. So for example, we have less than 10 years of gold left in the planet. And of course, we use gold for all kinds of stuff. So this becomes a problem.
I was going to add, a lot of us recycle, and we think we're doing a lot of good by recycling, but that's really just for beginners. There's so much more we can do, and this is where circular economy is the next level.
Right, yeah, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. Recycling, I'd actually flip and say it's the last resort. So I'd caution us not to say it's for beginners. It's actually the route of last resort within a circular economy. The idea instead is to leave an item as itself at its highest value for as long as possible. Then we can start taking a different set of actions around repairing, perhaps changing the product to be modular. So you take out just a section of it, but allow the rest of it to be itself. Maybe upcycling it into something else. Even downcycling it can often have more value from a landed cost perspective than recycling. Recycling is very resource intensive and often can really interrupt the integrity of the material, especially in plastics. And so when we think about, gosh, recycling, it's just the same as the circular economy. It's actually the very last possible resort that we put at the end of the option. But
I think when you don't know what you don't know and you don't learn about these new concepts, you think you're doing the right thing, but actually it's the last thing you should be doing. So
right.
That's what's great about hearing this concept.
Right. So if we go back to this idea of materials, as supply chain professionals, we know that there is value to be found across our supply chains. The circular economy said there is more value to be had. So we need to go and find that value. And just like we're talking about in today's world, typically when we're done with something, we throw it away. It goes into some landfill. But of course, in supply chain, we know the reality is we'll often harvest the metals from electronics, let's say. We've been doing this for years and years. But the circular economy says, gosh, all materials could have more value to offer, more than just what we're used to harvesting today. So the idea of the circular economy, again, is to allow the material to stay at its highest value for as long as possible. And we've talked about a couple of the processes that we do to do that. Here's the kicker. As a supply chain professional, as a group, we need to be able to process items, clean them, refurbish them, remanufacture them right alongside new builds. And this can be a real challenge. So this is really on us. The analyst group Gartner gives us 10 years to be ready to support circular business practices, and McKinsey gives us just 5. I don't know about you, but completely restructuring a process in 5 years is a tall order. And so here we are exploring these concepts to begin with. We got a lot of work ahead of us.
Yes, we do.
So let's think about the circular economy and the different principles where it's founded, right? So supply chains exist to serve the organizations that we're within. And so as these organizations start to adopt different business practices or maybe different strategies, circularity as a strategy, we should be ready. So I'm going to briefly go through the 3 principles of the circular economy and what that means for different business models. Of course, by now you've gathered that circularity is all about making money in a new way. So the first way is that businesses can and are forming around designing waste out. And this can be the basis of a business model. Some examples on this, of course, if we put on our lean thinking or Kaizen hats, we've been used to doing these types of thought exercises. We're starting to see examples of sharing platforms, for example. So the idea is that you keep an item as itself and increase utilization. So we can see sharing platforms both on a consumer level and an industrial level. I mentioned modular design earlier. This is really an advantage to organizations who are offering field service. So instead of having to send in your highly skilled technicians to each individual location, you can actually just take the module out and be able to centralize your skilled resources, which is a really nice advantage. Another example, which I think is kind of cool, is around 3D printing. New technologies, businesses popping up to offer these technologies. One example from inside GE is actually from our aviation business. They've been using 3D printing or additive manufacturing to make components both lighter and less complex. And what I mean by that is, imagine a component that used to have over 800 individual parts put in, it now has just 12. And if we think about what that means from a supplier complexity, from a SKU proliferation, even from a risk perspective, we're really opening up some great benefits.
But you're working together with that product design group, right?
Most
to come up with those. And
most
so
certainly.
You think that it's not just the supply chain area to grow. It's the strategy of the company to incorporate this circular economy thinking can cross many boundaries, and that collaboration comes into place.
Right. Yep. So these are some examples of business models that are starting to emerge under this principle. And if we think about what does this mean for supply chain, of course, we design waste out all the time. And this is where perhaps a controversial statement, but I'll say it anyway. I think supply chain professionals are best suited to solve for circularity. And this is because we are trained to look at processes in a different way. We can scan and look at waste. We can start thinking about how do we pull value out of waste. We've all been trained likely in lean manufacturing, lean business practices. And lean is all about finding and eliminating waste. Circularity is about finding and monetizing waste. So we're really in a lovely position to do this.
Well, I think right now everyone's looking at supply chains and thinking like, man, how do you get those PPEs and different products? And now supply chain has become a lot more attention on it, and I think that's where the profession itself is going to grow and be a cool place to be, like you said.
Yeah, exactly. So PPE actually brings up a great point in the second principle of the circular economy, which is really businesses based on keeping materials and resources in play or in use for as long as possible. And this is really about extending the life. And if we take PPE as an example, the way that we treat PPE right now is a good example that showcases a linear economy, how we run today, which is based on consumption and single use. We have built our global economy based on planned obsolescence. How do we make something need to be rebought every single time? The result, of course, is that our materials are not used to their highest value, and we don't squeeze out all the value before we throw them away. Imagine if we had designed PPE to be washed. We know that soap is a great combat to COVID. It's the best. And we could have a version of the world that is a wash and reuse. And now we wouldn't be in the big PPE crisis that we're in today. If we think about other business models around this, extending the life of an item, this is something supply chains are doing all over the world, thinking about optimized maintenance. There's a whole industry around predictive and prescriptive maintenance.
Yes.
We can also think about an area I would call resource recovery and transformation. The most prolific example is probably ocean plastics. Something I call, we're mining the ocean for plastic right now. And that's great because we got to get it out of there somehow. But there's new organizations that are coming up in an industry we might start considering secondary materials as a service. so that these organizations can then use them. And of course, ocean plastics are being spun into fabrics, being used for leggings and hats. They're being used for water bottles, all different kinds of sources. And the great shout out to material scientists of the world who are actually looking at plastics and saying, gosh, how do we do chemistry in a different way so that we are able to reuse this plastic again and again?
It seems to be leading to more innovations, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So very interesting here. The supply chain role for this should be quite clear. In order to build a business based on circulating materials, an organization needs to know a lot about those materials. They need to know where materials might currently be. They need to know the quality, the quantity, the location, the timing. And so it starts to really showcase that in a circular economy, everything becomes inventory. And now, full disclosure here, inventory is my all-time most favorite topic. So I'll hold myself back. But if you think about it, I mean, just wherever you're sitting right now, scan the room. Everything there is a material that could be used again. And this idea of using what's already detached from the planet, already in use, as the feedstock for everything we'll ever build again, this starts to be pretty mind-blowing and requires a supply chain professional to help solve for. All right, very last one here on the third principle. This is about businesses based on regenerating natural systems. And this is an interesting one. The other principles so far I've really talked about the types of materials that we call technical materials, really metals and plastics. This one really gets to the other side of what's called the butterfly diagram on natural or regenerative resources. Think heat, water, even food scraps and composting. And so as we see these businesses popping up, and these might look like reducing strain on the land with new types of protein being built. You know, think about lab-grown meats, for example. We have really cool circular agriculture coming up, which require different types of materials to be moved around. And as we see these biomaterials, you know, I saw the other day a picture of a grocery store and the asparagus was wrapped in banana leaves instead of
Oh, yeah, I saw something like that too.
About this. Right, and that requires a supply chain to have different capabilities. It probably means more temperature controlled supply chains, which we don't have today. So there's all these different ways that supply chains really required to help the circular economy transition, accelerate even more.
Thanks, Deborah. We're unfortunately out of time, but let me see if I can summarize some of the points that you've brought up. So we're transitioning from linear to circular economies. It's inevitable. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Organizations we support are changing to adopt circular business practices. So as supply chain professionals, individuals, we should get familiar with these things and get ahead of that. Also, I think you mentioned that supply chain strategies can incorporate these circular economy concepts to help them improve their financial performance. So there's a win-win there. And supply chain professionals, we're just the best suited to take care of these new concepts, designs, to just think about all the different aspects. And we have all the relationships as well with our suppliers and our customers and our different departments. So I think this is all wonderful information. I've been following this topic, and personally I'm very interested. And to have you as our thought leader here today, thank you so much for sharing all this information, and I look forward to future conversations on this topic.
Thank
Thanks.
you.